Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Christine Paxia, your host of the Garden Path. So thank you for tuning in. Today you're in for a treat. What is maybe 3 feet tall, could be 200 to 300 years old, living but doesn't look a day over 10? If you guessed bonsai, you are correct. Today we are at the Arnold Arboretum and with director Steven Schneider, who's Director of Operations of the Bonsai Collection. And he is going to talk to you a little bit about the history, and then we'll talk to Glenn Lord about the care of bonsai and what goes into it. So follow me for a treat. So we're standing here outside the Bonsai Collection Pavilion at the Arnold Arboretum with Steven Schneider, the Director of Operations. And he has been looking after these beautiful trees for a few years now. So welcome, Steven. Thank you for coming here and talking to us about your babies.
Sure, thanks for coming.
You mentioned to me earlier that this collection dates back to Lars Anderson.
Yes.
So maybe you could elaborate a little bit about that.
Absolutely. So Lars Anderson, who was briefly the ambassador to Japan during the Taft administration, he and his wife were over in Japan for about 7 months, fell in love with bonsai, and decided to take a few home with them, around 50 or so. And so in 1913, the collection was put on a boat, shipped across the Pacific, made their way to California, and then went all the way on rail from California to Boston, and arrived in Boston in 1913, where they lived on his estate, right in Brookline. At the time, there was really no one in the United States that knew how to deal with bonsai. So Mr. Anderson hired a Japanese gentleman to come over with the plants and care for the plants. And so it was around 1934 or so that Lars Anderson, his good friend Charles Sprague Sargent, who was our first director, as a donation to the Arboretum, Anderson donated about half of the plants to the Arboretum. And then upon his death in the 1950s, his widow donated the rest of the collection to the Arboretum, where it was housed at the Bussey Estate. And then when the Bussey Estate closed in 1962, they were moved to this location here, right at the Dana Greenhouses.
Well, that's great. Now, you mentioned that Lars Anderson lived in Brookline. Didn't he have a few famous friends and neighbors?
He did. There were Isabella Stewart Gardner was one of them.
She's a little famous.
She is a little famous, and she also had a nice bonsai collection.
She?
She did, and it was for the 100-year anniversary of the plants arriving in Boston. We actually had 6 of the plants in the courtyard at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum.
Oh, that must have been beautiful.
So that was really beautiful.
Was that at the time when they had the cascading nasturtiums?
It was. Yes.
I bet it was beautiful.
It was a gorgeous sight.
So this is a very small area,
yes,
but everything is displayed on its own perch and own table with a label in it. So can you tell us a little bit about the trees that are here, the style perhaps?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So there's actually a mix. I mentioned that the very first, the flagship collection is indeed the Lars Anderson bonsai collection. But over the years, through different curators, we have had additions to the collection. Some of them made right here in Boston. Our very first honorary curator, her name was Connie Dedarian, and she did add to the collection. Her successor, Peter Deltredige, who was curator for about 25 years here, he went over to China and actually bought several new plants that were technically classified as Penjing because they were Chinese. And so we have some beautiful Chinese elms. And it was when I took over a couple of years ago, we acquired a little bit more space in the greenhouse complex to thin out the display of the collection, prior to which we were putting all of the plants in this display area, which it really wasn't working out. The plants really want to be viewed at eye level. They want to have some negative space in between them. And so, yes, we were able to achieve that by moving about half of the collection out back into a holding area. And now this display area acts as a rotational viewing, where we bring plants in and out every couple of months and switch up the display.
Well, it's just stunning. So, in this display, what is the oldest tree?
So the oldest tree is actually right over there. It is a Hinoki cypress from 1789, which is quite old. And the interesting thing is bonsai is a style that really came about in the late 1800s. So prior to which, these trees are actually in an ancient form called hachinoki, which essentially the shape of the plant represents an object in nature. And these, all of these Hinoki cypresses that we have in the collection were in the form of the Mount Fuji style of hachinoki. So yes, 1789 is the oldest plant in this part of the collection. When we go out back, we'll see the oldest, which is from 1737.
They don't look a day over 5.
No.
So you had mentioned that one of these specimen Hinoki cypress was used to propagate some cuttings.
Yes.
And one of those cuttings is now in the form of a life-size tree.
Yes, and so a lot of people ask, well, what's so special about these plants? Are these special plants that bonsai, anything can really be bonsai'd, some better than others. These Hinoki cypresses in particular, we do take them in the winter because we don't want the pots freezing, but they are cold hardy plants. And so in the late 60s, vegetative cuttings were taken off of, I actually believe it was this one here. They were rooted, and then small plants were generated from those cuttings. And in 1971, they planted one of those plants right next to the bonsai pavilion here, and that, I don't know, it looks about 30 feet tall now, and is now about 45, 46 years old, is quite a large plant. And so when you really compare the one from the early 1800s to the one that was planted in 1971 from it, you can see what the plant wants to do, but between the pruning of the roots, pruning of the canopy, the wiring that's done to give it its shape, that is what all of the human activity, if you will enable one to create.
Well, there is an awful lot of love and care that's required for these trees, and seeing them and hearing the descriptions gives a whole new appreciation into what went into producing the specimen. I mean, in the past, you see a tree and it's a bonsai, but not really knowing much about it. And so the shallow pots that you see here, that's housing roots that are how big? They're normal size roots. With bonsai, we're not looking for a lot of taproot. We're looking for mostly the fibrous feeder roots. And so the plants are, in general, repotted every 3 to 5 years. And that's a rule of thumb. It's not that it's a schedule, but what we're looking for is once the drainage begins to become quite poor. We want to see the water flowing right through that soil. Once it starts to pool up at the top, we know that the plant has to be repotted. When we say repotted, we really mean take it out of its pot, we do some root pruning, put some new soil in, and put it right back in the same pot for the most part. That is fascinating. And I'm so thrilled that you were willing to meet with us today and talk about this collection, which will still be on display at the Arboretum until around Thanksgiving. So if you want to come in and see it, come to the Arboretum before Thanksgiving. It's on display in this pavilion. Otherwise, pretty soon they will be going in for the winter in their winter storage facility.
But we'll be back out around the first couple of weeks in April, depending on what the weather's doing at the time.
So come and take a look. It's worthwhile. They're beautiful. Okay, now we're shifting gears, and we're over at the Lath House, where there's overstock of bonsai. And today we're here with Glenn Lord from Potted Up. And he is the caretaker of these little gems, or I should say big gems. So thank you for coming out
Thank
pretty
you
early.
for coming out and seeing us.
Great.
So we are here in the Lath House. In the Lath House is where we keep trees that there isn't room for in the bonsai enclosure on exhibit. Also, we keep trees that have been recently repotted, so they can have a little bit of extra protection and care. This tree is the oldest tree in the collection. This tree is another one of the Hinoki cypress from the Lars Anderson collection. This tree was started in Japan as a bonsai in 1737. So this tree here is older than our nation, and it's pretty amazing that it's had somebody taking care of it since 1737. It's been checked every day for water. It's been trained with, in the old days it would have been trained with bamboo slats and twine to flatten out the branches. Sometimes they were weighted with stones to pull branches down. But this is the oldest example of a purpose-grown plant for potted plants as a bonsai, so to say. This guy was repotted this spring. That's why it's in here, and it will go back out on display most likely next year when we bring the plants out.
That's amazing. So do you know where you were in 1737?
A lot of us weren't in this country. So here, as we go down through the Lath House here, we have a bunch of ginkgos. The previous curator wasn't really liked ginkgos and did some research on them, so hence we have a bunch of ginkgos in the collection. And as you can see, they're doing the same fall foliage like a plant would in the grounds here at the Arboretum. A lot of people kind of forget that it's in a pot, so they think it needs special care as far as protection from cold. These guys have been right out with all the cold weather, and they want the cold weather to help them shut down and go to sleep for the winter. As you can see, the ginkgos get the bright gold color, and they'll shed all their leaves. Generally, when the tree starts to shed, it will shed all its leaves in one day.
Now, I'm noticing different styles. So you have this ginkgo, which is a bonsai.
This is a ginkgo as well.
Ginkgo as well.
Yep,
and then you have the cypress in such different styles.
Yep, and we do lots of different species are grown as bonsai. We have everything from apples to hornbeams to Chinese elms. And as we go down, I can show you we have a couple of lilacs and winter hazel, not witch hazel, but winter hazel, which is Coralopsis, which flowers late winter. So you can really bonsai just about anything. There's no rule that says you can't bonsai a species.
Okay.
So as we go down to this other cypress here, this tree is known in our collection as the root over the rock. You'll notice that it no longer has a rock. Over the years, the rock has fallen apart and gone missing. We're actually trying to find a nice new stone that will go right in between the trees here. And this was actually as two separate trees that were planted together on the stone, and the stone went right through the hollow on both of the trees. You can see a lot of people get hung up on the containers, and the containers are as much aesthetic as anything else. Bonsai containers in previous years in antiques where bonsai pots are often grown as like jardinières, big deep pots. Most of the trees when they originally came to this country were in large deep pots. The shallow pots are more of a modern invention in bonsai community. And it's a literal translation of the word bonsai, which is plant in pot or plant in tray. So we get this mind of we need to have them in shallow pots. Once we put trees in shallow pots, we need to tend to the roots. A lot of people are scared to tend to roots in plants. They think they're doing harm to them. As you can see, these plants don't have anything done to them that would harm them. Mm-hmm. We're not going to try to damage a tree. This tree is from 1844. So we give them kind of the Cadillac of care here at the Arboretum with special soil that's imported from Japan and special fertilizer and a special care in the winter where we bring them into winter storage. So these trees are really pampered here at the Arboretum.
So when you say winter storage, what's that like for them?
So these are cold hardy trees need a winter. They need to be cold. So here at the Arboretum, they go into a temperature controlled bunker that is kept at just about freezing, slightly above. Many of these trees could take a little bit colder, but it's kind of a communal storage area, and some trees needed a slightly warmer. But these trees need to sleep the winter away, just like the trees in the ground here. So we need to provide them some protection from the winter so they don't dry out, so their foliage doesn't dry out, because they are in shallow pots and they would lose their moisture that they can't replace because the soil is frozen. So it can't move water up into the foliage.
So there's a lot of thought and care required for these babies to make it to the ripe young age of from 1844.
Yep.
So this type of tree, a little
Yep.
different than the cypress.
Yep, so this is a deciduous tree. This is, I mentioned the winter hazel, which is Coralopsis, and it has its buds prepared for next spring to flower. And it also has some wire on it that I put on this spring, which is to move branches. And wire is one of the tools that we use on modern bonsai that is available to us, because in the old days we would have used bamboo slats or twine to pull or weight branches down. Now we can use wire, and it's very effective for moving branches. It doesn't have to be done. We can do clip and grow. So some trees are grown just from pruning and letting it regrow and pruning it back again. But bonsai wire helps us kind of cheat a little bit, but it goes through a faster process when we use the wire. We don't have to cut back so much.
How old is this one?
This tree is from 1986. It was accessioned into the collection, and this came from Connie Dedarian, who was responsible for really renovating the collection in the 50s and through the early 80s.
It's a pretty tree.
It is a very pretty tree, especially when it's in flower.
Oh, I bet. So, what do you have over here? I'm seeing little mini cypresses.
Yeah, so these are cuttings that were taken from the arboretum trees, from the cypress in the collection. So these are Hinoki cypress, the Shavohiba cultivar as
So
well.
pretty much the same as the old man over there?
Exactly the same. Yep. We have trees that have we keep lineage to. These were cuttings that were made probably about 7 years ago, and they're being trained into new bonsai. And we use these in classes or to show what we would do for workshops, or what we would do to a tree as we raise it. So some of the principles, like I had mentioned, the wire, these have had one wiring already, but I can show you what we would do to
Sure.
bring them along.
I'd love to. So this is 7 years old?
Yeah, it's about 7 years old.
Okay.
So it's about as old as the oldest tree when it went into its first bonsai container.
It's hard to imagine that in 300 years.
Yeah,
Take pictures.
Exactly. There were a lot of photos of the collection through the years when they were accessioned and brought to the Arboretum and brought over the United States.
So you're clipping some things off.
Yeah, so I have some lower branches that really aren't doing anything for me down here. They're kind of small and spindly and a little too close together.
Okay.
So as the tree starts to grow up, we start to pick branches that we want the energy to go into to thicken them up, so we can really start to get that tree shape instead of just like a shrub in a pot. So some of our principles are, we want to trim out branches that are on the inside of terns, and the reason why we do that is a branch on the inside of the tern would normally be shaded out by the branches above it. So we just take away that branch so it's not wasting energy into the branch that we're not going to keep. So then we just kind of go through and look at where branches come from. We don't want 2 or 3 branches all coming from the same spot. And the reason why is it will thicken up there and become what we call reverse taper. So we really want to try to focus our energy into 1 or 2 branches in a section. And if too many branches are coming from that one section, we need to thin it out some. So we have some thicker branches in here, so I'm going to favor the thicker branches and release and get rid of the smaller ones and kind of alternate my growth up through.
It's already looking like old
Just-
Charlie over there.
Yeah,
whatever his name is.
just pruning does a lot of work, and it's people are amazed at just a little bit of pruning. Oftentimes, people are scared to prune, and again, what we're doing to this tree is not hurting it. It's just more directing the stuff where we want it. As a lot of people have told me over the years, is if you're afraid to prune, you're never going to have a bonsai because you've got to clip. So another thing with cypress is we want to keep the growth closer into the trunk. The reason why is over time, cypress will shed the old growth inside, and we can see just even on this little guy, there's some brown growth down on the inside here. And this is the older needles that are coming off, and it sheds them in the fall. And so if we were to not prune a tree, it would end up that it would be naked branches on the inside, and all the growth would be way out on the ends. So we need to prune it to keep it tighter in to the trunk of the tree.
Fascinating.
There's a lot to learn, but it's stuff that you can learn by doing. It's not something that is above anybody. Bonsai is not a hobby that's for the elite. So,
Should I show you my tree?
yeah, we have a soldier down here. And so what happened with this tree is it got dried out. In indoor bonsai culture can be a little difficult because trees may get a little dried out, and if you don't catch it in time, the tree could die. The other thing is this bonsai soil is very aggregate based, so it's 2/3 aggregate. So rocks or stones, and then this little ground up terracotta, and then 1/3 organics. So what happens is there's very little leeway for mistakes, especially in small trees, as we can see.
I found that out. That was my bad,
so
baby.
it's a little crispy, but the nice thing about having a tree that dies is you now have a really nice pot you can put another one in.
I think I can throw rings in it or something instead.
So now, a tree like this, if we catch it in time, can be recovered. Obviously, this one is a little far gone for us to recover, but maybe we can try something that might be a little more easy inside, like a succulent that could take a little bit drier conditions. There's really no plant, no person that has an environment that you couldn't grow a potted, containerized bonsai or plant in. There's always a plant for the right location. It's just a matter of picking that plant. So growing a tropical plant for indoors, conifer or deciduous tree for outdoors, it's just a matter of picking the right plant for the right situation. We all have in our mind that this is bonsai, but tropical plants make excellent bonsai as well.
Right. So you were going to wire?
Yep, so
that?
I'm just going to put a piece of wire on the trunk of this tree. Move him out of the way. And we can just discard that on the ground here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with anchoring my wire into the soil. And that's just to hold it so it has a place that's anchored and stiff, so when I start to bend the wire, it doesn't twist around and come off. So what I'm doing is, it seems very... to me, I can do it easily because I've done it so much. Wiring is a technique that takes a lot of practice to learn to do properly. And what you want to do is you want to start the wire being twisted before you put it on the tree. I don't want to use the tree as the point to bend the wire as an access point because it'll go on too tightly then. So what I'm going to do is I bend it as it lays on. And so you can see that twist is already ready to be just brought into the tree. And it just lays lightly on there. If I put it on too tightly, it's going to cut into the bark and damage it. Now, the tree will survive that. The tree sometimes will even grow around the wire, but we don't want that damage to be seen. We want it to be a clean trunk. So as I just use this and I get some twists on it, and we'll wire all the way up to the top of the tree. And then I'll show you how we bend it. The last wire was on the opposite way, so this I'm bending around this way, the previous wire was around this way. So we try to alternate it so we don't go into the same grooves that the old wire was in, just so we don't cause damage. We want to try to avoid that damage.
How long do you leave the wire on?
Wire can be left on a conifer like this about a year. It depends on how vigorous the plant is. It's one of the things that we monitor. Plants don't understand what a calendar is, so we need to monitor the plant. So we'll look, and if the wire's starting to cut in a little bit, we'll come along and we cut it. We actually don't unwire it because it's like a cast. We use the wire almost as a cast. And if we were to come along and try to unwrap a cast, it would re-break the bone again. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to set the trunk, which is kind of like the bone, in a certain position. So what we do is we cut it at every twist and the wire falls off. So I go right up all the way to the top of the tree. And as you can see, I'm plucking stuff that's in the way that might get wrapped under the wire. I don't want that. I just remove it. In a young, vigorous tree like this, it's not going to matter one bit.
So he's flying under the wire?
So we are all the way up into the top of the tree.
So your work drives you up a tree?
It does drive me up the tree. Yes, it does. So we've got our wire all the way up. And now I can just take this trunk and I can start to manipulate it. And I can start to put stronger bends in it.
Wow.
And the reason why I'm supporting this is I'm bending the wire. It seems like semantics, but I'm really bending the wire, not the tree. The tree is just coming along with the wire. If I was to really bend the tree, it would likely break. So what I really want to do is I want to just bend the wire, and then that foliage and tree comes along with it. Now, it's a little bit cluttered up in here, so now's the time for me to come up and also just trim it out so I can open that tree up a little bit so we can see. And I don't like how the top ended, so I'm just going to trim off a piece and end it a little bit lower. And a lot of it is the artist's or the pruner's desire. So there are rules to height, width ratio, but we're not even close to that at this point. This is just a young tree in training. This is kindergarten for bonsai.
It's already looking like
it looks more like
an
it.
old man down there.
Yeah, it's very simple. It's not a difficult. Again, I try to tell people as in beginners, don't be afraid. You can't be afraid to cut. You can't be afraid to make mistakes. It happens. You know, I didn't start off working at the Arnold Arboretum on the oldest bonsai collection in the Americas on my first day. So. We make lots of mistakes, and there's nothing wrong with that. We just learn and see what the tree does, and then we move on. So now this guy's ready for his year with this wire on. We'll take it off next year, and then we'll start to really wire out branches and continue its growth.
Well, that's fascinating. Thank you for showing that.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
So we saw the collection out front. We saw a little bit of the care here. We met the oldest living bonsai in the Americas, dating back to 1700s, before the U.S. had the Constitution. It's all amazing. So next time you come to the Arboretum, be sure to look for this fabulous collection because it's a history lesson and it's another aspect of gardening.
It is, and as gardeners, you have to be able to touch all aspects of your garden, and we grow containerized plants as annuals all the time, but we often don't think of growing a plant in a container for nearly 300 years.
Right. So thank you for joining us today, and we hope you enjoy the show. I'm sitting here in front of this beautiful Hinoki cypress that dates back to 1799. They affectionately call her Big Bertha, and you can see why. So if you've enjoyed the show, if you have any questions, you can email me at the Milton Garden Path at gmail.com and like us on Facebook, Milton Garden Path. So tune in next week, folks.